G'day, lovely people. I hope you are doing well this whatever time of day it is. Okay, so today I want to talk to you about a people topic. Over the years, I've had one insight over and over again. The vast majority of technical problems are really people problems in disguise. Given this, I thought we'd talk today a little bit about working with other people as well as some of the traps that organizations can find themselves in. So far, throughout my career, I've been many different things. I've been a software engineer, a systems engineer, site reliability engineer, principal engineer, and finally, most recently, an engineering manager. I've built new user interfaces and checkouts and Ansible definitions, Kubernetes clusters, and most recently, I've been embedded in a large organization in a team that's dedicated to improving the reliability of that transactional experience. This all sounds very impressive, but let me assure you that it is a journey that has been absolutely littered with failure. As a software engineer, I've broken whole shops. As a systems engineer, I've deleted critical data. As a site reliability engineer in a major production issue, I have been monumentally wrong at strong insistence while millions of dollars have just slipped away. I've caught Bitcoin miners running around my non-production environment, and I've soured relationships with colleagues. All of this is to say that I've struggled quite a lot in my journey. As a site reliability engineer, I've also been exposed to many other teams' struggles. Over time, I've developed this almost a preoccupation with failure. This has led me to the study of failure, which really unexpectedly led me to the study of success. There have been some really invaluable lessons here, but I want to discuss one in particular. Before we continue, I'd like to invite you to hit that subscribe button to this channel. By doing this, you're encouraging me to continue making more content in the future, as well as kind of helping convince the platforms to share this content with more people. So let's start at the start with what we're even trying to do as engineers. Our work's fundamental value is making our users' lives easier. There are different ways to do this, but in my experience, the most remarkable deliverables result from some unique insight someone has about the customer perspective, the product vision, and the technology, and they're able to kind of combine them in a new and innovative way. Understanding that, for example, that when people buy clothes online, they may struggle to understand their sizes, but recent gains in computer vision can be leveraged to make that easier. Zalando's exploited this through the size recommendations tool. Or another example is where customers are happy to watch maybe a subset of content instantly if they don't have to leave their house. This is Netflix. To make these more immense capabilities available to customers, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but in each deliverable along that path, there's often an insight that allows a lot of work to be done much more efficiently. For example, we might consider rather than deploying on Kubernetes, we'll deploy on App Engine, or rather than using C++, we'll use Go or Python. Rather than using Redis as a document store, we'll use DynamoDB. Small efficiencies lead to some teams just substantially outperforming others and delivering that critical customer value. Insight comes from a few people with a really large amount of context and the ability to combine that context in really new and exciting ways, often in discussions with others. However, there can be a bit of a gap between how these colleagues kind of gain and leverage their insights versus how leadership views that same work. I'm going to call this the decision maker disconnect. Within any given organization, there's usually a set of people who hold substantially more power than others. This can be more formally allocated, for example, engineering management, or they can have it due to some sort of expertise or reputation. This could be either staff or site reliability engineering or any other expert role. Because of this power, these colleagues can either directly make or strongly influence decisions. These colleagues all have kind of some notion as to how the organization works. They might have explicitly prescribed it through a strategy document, or they may have some sort of working model from their own experience. They use this understanding as a precursor, as a bedrock on which to make further decisions. One of the more surprising things, shall we say, from the human factors research is just how disconnected a decision maker's model of how the organization work gets done is from how the organization actually delivers. Sometimes this overlap is very slim indeed. In practice, there are 4 different ways to view work. Work as imagined, that is, how we kind of think that others might go about that work. Work as prescribed, how the work should be done, at least on paper. Work as disclosed, or how we describe the work to our colleagues and to our leaders. And finally, work as done, which is how the work is actually delivered. One of the challenges that decision makers within an organization will face is that the power dynamic between a decision maker, let's call them a high power person, and the person executing that decision, a low power person, means that the lower power person is exposed to a much more comprehensive and significant set of adverse consequences if they challenge that leader. This could be really simple, such as just losing esteem in the eyes of that decision maker, or as significant as being publicly criticized by that decision maker for disagreeing with their perspective. As colleagues on the execution side of decisions deal with a kind of a broader range of leaders, they tend to encounter leaders who are more punitive in their approach, who will take a more adversarial role, and thus start to tailor their information to minimize the chance of that leader just being unhappy. The more extreme the power differential between the decision maker and the executor, the more likely an executor will tailor that information to the benefit of the decision maker. For an organization that is really fundamentally predicated on having insight, this can be disastrous. At best, the colleague may not contribute their ideas about how to achieve a company goal. At worst, the colleague will kind of contort themselves into agreeing with the decision maker. The colleague views the work through some sort of wildly optimistic lens, something like, if everything works exactly right, I can make this work, which, given that everything invariably doesn't, leads to these missed expectations and kind of just general unhappiness. So the question is then, how do we create an organization that promotes the kind of discussion that yields the most insight? In his article, Why Do Things Go Right?, Sidney Dekker highlights several critical properties of organizations that are essentially more successful. These include, number 1, a diversity of opinion and the ability to voice dissent. Number 2, keeping a discussion on risk alive. Number 3, deference to expertise. Number 4, the ability to say stop. And number 5, broken down barriers between hierarchies and departments. Number 6, not waiting on audits or inspections to improve. And number 7, pride in workmanship. The challenge of any decision maker, or indeed anyone responsible for the management of people, is to try and figure out how to encourage diversity and dissent and discussions on risk, the ability to say stop, and so on and so forth. The decision maker must first make the environment psychologically safe in order to promote these behaviors. Psychological safety itself is a relatively new construct. It can be described as the belief that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. At work, it's a shared expectation held by members of a team that will not embarrass, reject, or punish them for sharing ideas, taking risks, or soliciting feedback. This comes from the Center for Creative Leadership. Leaders within an organization influence psychological safety through their actions, whether by encouraging discussion or punishing dissent. Leaders set the tone for what is tolerable within their organizations. Correspondingly, this leads to insightful engineering outcomes or no insights, late projects, and just kind of a general misery. In his article, Psychological Safety in Operations Teams, John Looney recommends some really concrete ways that leaders can make their organizations psychologically safer. These include creating a space for people to take chances, making it obvious when the team is doing well, making your communication very clear and your expectations absolutely explicit, making your teams feel safe. In my experience, the most kind of critical habit to maintain here I'll call listening with the intent to understand. Personally, I'll ask questions about how colleagues are feeling about their work as I'm having a one-on-one. Their primary challenges, how they feel it fits into the strategic whole. I'll listen and try and restate their perspective and ask them to confirm that my understanding is correct before we proceed. Then I'll try and answer that question using their language and reconcile it with what I've seen and what other stakeholders might be considering. This gives them practically a much larger context to operate with and the ability to ask further clarifying questions. In broader environments, we can set this expectation, for example, by maybe just asking questions that are deliberately naive so as to set the expectations that others also have this capability. We can ask for input from our colleagues, and we can give them, as we're asking for that input, the explicit direction that we're asking them because of their perspective, even if they do not share or even fully understand what's happening. We can listen and we can be kind in our interactions. Lastly, there are environments in which conversation is just inherently more permissible. This includes things like going for a walk or meeting at a conference or meetup, having a glass of wine after work. These all deliberately manufacture a different context to discuss a topic that can make it much easier for people to take more risk. By taking these actions, decision makers can encourage their executors to take more chances when proposing or discussing or contributing to a group discussion. More discussion allows a greater diversity of opinion and dissent and the ability to recognize and surface expertise. This, in turn, will enable us to fundamentally manufacture insight. There is a caveat to an organization that encourages dissent, and that is that without controls around decision making, we can get stuck in what's called analysis paralysis. In my experience, while decisions should be discussed freely, there comes a point in which a leader needs to make and own a decision. This has made a much smoother process if there's a way of retrospecting previous decisions made, as well as learning whether or not there's a different decision that could be made in future. This allows dissenting colleagues to, shall we say, disagree and commit. That dissenting colleague, the manager, and everybody else who's around this project can then learn from the results of those decisions, manufacturing even more insight. And that's it. Recapping, my career so far has been varied, honestly, but with really frequent failure. Most recently, I've made failure my study of choice, and through this, I've encountered, very surprisingly, the analysis of success. This has led me to understand engineering value being fundamentally measured in customer happiness or customers' lives more easily made, which is most easily in turn found through some sort of unique insight into existing set of problems and technologies that can be applied together in a new way. This can be challenging to implement within organizations, as decision makers can become disconnected from those that actually execute on those decisions. The power dynamic within an organization means that unless they're invested, those leaders may never discover how what they expect doesn't bear up against reality. What happens in reality might be much more fraught with risk than those leaders otherwise expect. Some organizations are more routinely successful, and those organizations prioritize discussions. They have diverse opinions and they allow dissent. To turn our organizations into these successful examples, we need to cultivate an environment of psychological safety that will enable our colleagues to raise their diverse opinions and participate in these discussions. If we do this, we'll have a much larger kind of space to find our fundamentally more elegant insight and a group of peers who's able to understand and execute on them, delivering on that most valuable improved customer experience. Thanks for joining me today. I hope this was valuable for you. If it was, please hit that like and subscribe button. You'll be helping me kind of trick the algorithm into sharing this with more people. Thank you very much and see you next time.